Welcome everyone to this special edition of FiOS 1 News. I am Richard French, the moderator of tonight's debate between the incumbent Democratic Congressman Tim Bishop and his Republican challenger, businessman Randy Altschuler. It's one of the most hotly contested congressional races in the entire country, and it's also a rematch of the 2010 election where the congressman won by a slim margin, less than 600 votes. Now, Congressman Bishop, he has represented the 1st District, which spans the eastern end of Long Island from Smithtown to Montauk Point since 2003. Now, Mr. Altschuler, he's worked as an investment banker and is the co-founder of an electronics recycling company based in Georgia. Now, we're coming to you live from the campus of St. Joseph's College in Patchogue, right here on Long Island. The debate, it's being held in the auditorium in O'Connor Hall. And we're very pleased to be here. Now, joining us tonight for this one-hour event is our panel. My colleague will begin from FiOS 1 News anchor Mike Stevens, and 2 other panelists from our media partners here on the island, John Caligari from Long Island Business News and Spencer Rumsey from the Long Island Press. Now, before we begin, I'd like to give a warm thank you and welcome here to our 2 candidates. Thank you both for joining us. Now, we did the perfunctory coin toss before the debate to determine the order of opening and closing statements, and each candidate will be given 90 seconds for opening statements as well as 90 seconds for closing statements. And responses to the questions asked by our panel will also be 90 seconds apiece. As moderator, I may ask for a little clarification on particular points and also play a little traffic cop. All right, as determined by the opening coin flip, the congressman delivers the first opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, all of you, for coming, and I thank FiOS for hosting this debate, and I certainly thank St. Joseph's College for hosting it, and it's always a pleasure to be on the campus of St. Joseph's College, and I'm particularly pleased to see my friend Gary Richard deliver the Pledge of Allegiance. Gary is an Iraq vet that we have helped upon his return, and I thank you for your service, Gary. I have lived in this district for 62 years. I have worked in this district for nearly 40. And over the course of that time, I've had 2 jobs, one at Southampton College for 29 years and one now in the Congress for 10 years. And even though I've had 2 very different jobs, I basically have spent my entire adult life doing the same thing, and that is helping people, such as Gary. We worked very hard at Southampton College to see to it that students got their chance to get their slice of the American dream, and we work very, very hard in our congressional office to see to it that we deliver the services of the federal government to those who need them the most, and we cut through the red tape that the federal government sometimes puts in the way of people to see to it that they get the benefits that they deserve. I am very, very proud of the service that we have provided to over 15,000 of our constituents, and I'm sure over the course of the debate we'll get an opportunity to explore more the kinds of services that we provide. But I thank you. 90 seconds is not a lot of time, but I thank you very much, and I look forward to the questions from the panel.
Absolutely. Your opening statement, Mr. Altschuler.
Well, first of all, I'd also like to thank St. Joseph's and FiOS for hosting today's debate, and thank everyone for coming. It is a thrill to be here. And I have been fortunate enough to live the American dream. I don't think my grandparents, when they came here from Poland prior to the Second World War, could have imagined that their grandson would be up here running for Congress. One of the best things in this country is that opportunity that all of us have. I thought I'd take my 90 seconds and tell you a little bit about myself and why I decided to run for Congress. As I mentioned, my grandparents came here from Poland, didn't have any money. Neither of them went to high school. My grandfather, they lived in New York. He sold newspapers in the street corner. And eventually he got a job selling vacuum cleaners door to door. We had a lot of vacuum cleaners at my house growing up. My mom was the first person in her family to go to college, and she brought me and my brother up on her own. My father left when I was very young. She's extremely hardworking. She pushed me and my brother. I worked my way through school. I was a security guard and a short order cook, and I met my wife Cheryl over 20 years ago. I spent my whole life in business, and today I live in St. James. My wife Cheryl is a pediatrician, and we have 2 young children, a 5-year-old son, Noah, and a 1-year-old daughter, Sasha. I've built 2 companies, created over 1,000 American jobs, but I'm very worried about our future today. I am worried about the future for my children and for your grandchildren. And it's because I'm concerned about our debt, the lack of jobs, programs that need to be fixing, that I decided to run for Congress and try to make a difference. So thanks once again. I look forward to answering the questions.
All right. Let's begin now with our first question. And John, it's directed to Mr. Altschuler.
Mr. Altschuler, with less than 3 months until sequestration takes effect, what, if any, actions would be best for Congress to make to meet the requirements of the Budget Control Act of 2011?
Well, unfortunately, the Congress has been unable, both sides, and I'm going to put the blame here on both with the Democrats and with the Republicans, have been unable to come up with a deal that will prevent this from happening up until now. And we have this terrible cliff that you talked about where we're going to look at massive cuts that nobody thinks is acceptable. The Defense Secretary came out and said that our military couldn't handle those kinds of cuts. I'm not sure what's going to happen during the lame duck session. I'm confident or cautiously confident that both sides are going to come to their senses and sit down. I'm not sure they're going to solve the fundamental problems that we have, that we're spending more than $1 trillion a year than we have, that we're taking in. But hopefully they'll come to some sort of arrangement to make sure that these radical cuts don't go through. We can't afford them. The military can't afford them. And we need to make sure that our men and women who are fighting for our country have whatever we can and whatever they need to do that service.
Congressman?
I don't know anybody that wants sequestration. It was put in place as basically a club to see to it that both sides came to the table and negotiated a settlement and a compromise that would allow us to go forward in a reasonable way. One of the problems that I foresee is we ought to be in session. Congress has been in session 8 days, from August 2nd through November 13th, a total of 8 days. Now, we have this looming problem. Sequestration is just one of them. We have this whole fiscal cliff problem, plus other issues all expiring on December 31st, and we ought to be in Washington. The fact that the leadership of the House of Representatives took us out of session when we could be there trying to help resolve these problems, I think is deeply unfortunate. We should have been in session more than 8 days from August 2nd through November 13th. But I do believe that there will be some kind of deal. No one knows what the shape of that deal will be, but sequestration will be wrapped up in other issues, including the debt limit, including what we call the DOC fix, the sustainable growth rate fix, the renewal of the tax cuts, looking at the estate tax, looking at the alternative minimum tax. These are all issues that we've got to get resolved, and I believe that they will all come together in some certainly to be imperfect compromise that will allow us to go forward. As I say, this would have been a lot easier for us to handle. It's going to be difficult under any circumstance, but a lot easier for us to handle if we were in session.
Why are you optimistic?
I'm optimistic because the stakes are so high. The stakes are so high, and failure is not an option.
Couldn't we have said that at the end of last year?
Absolutely.
And so what happened?
Absolutely, we could have. But I believe, and by the way, at the end of last year, we did come together. We entered into a compromise with respect to the renewal of the Social Security withholding, if that's what you're referring to. Took too long at the 11th hour, way too much anxiety, but we got it done. I believe the same kind of thing is going to happen this time.
Spencer Rumsey, your question goes to the Congressman.
Good evening, guys.
Hi, Spencer.
I'm going to start this with a quote from Representative Paul Ryan, who recently said, "We are at a moment where if government's growth is left unchecked and unchallenged, America's best century will be considered our past century. This is a future in which we will transform our social safety net into a hammock, which lulls able-bodied people into lives of complacency and dependency." So my question is, are the growing federal programs such as Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare creating a culture of dependency and entitlement that will bankrupt our country?
I remember when my friend Paul Ryan made that statement, and I frankly found it insulting. I think to suggest that an 85-year-old woman who's in a nursing home paid for by Medicaid is taking advantage of a social safety net and is somehow relying on the federal government because she's unwilling to do it on her own, I think that's insulting. So my own view, the first part of that statement I agree with, that we're at a moment. The part of the statement that says that we have created a culture of dependency, frankly, I think is dead wrong. And we clearly have to create an environment in which there are opportunities for people to excel. One of the reasons I work so hard, for example, at seeing to it that support for higher education remains as strong as it is because we need to create an opportunity for people to excel. I find it ironic that Paul Ryan is saying that we've created a culture of dependency, yet is taking away the opportunity for people to gain access to a higher education. What he's proposing to do to the federal budget in higher education would devastate institutions such as this one and would have a dramatic impact on the students who go here. So we have to find the right balance. We clearly need self-reliance, no question about it. But to say that a physically disabled child who requires inpatient nursing care or inpatient living care is the beneficiary of a culture of dependency is simply insulting.
Mr. Altschuler.
I don't think we've created a culture of dependency. I think that everybody wants to be independent. People don't want to depend on others or our government for their health care or for their financial security. They want to take their own responsibility and put it in their own hands. So I don't think people do that other than in instances where they need to depend on it. But the problem we have right now is that we haven't done anything to fix these programs. Social Security, as we know, the Social Security Trust Fund by 2036 will be exhausted. That will inflict immediately a 25% reduction in the benefits that everybody's getting from Social Security. Medicare Part A, the hospital reimbursement, by 2024, that will be bankrupt, exhausted, that trust fund. So our Congress, and Congressman Bishop has been there for 10 years, have failed to deal with these issues. And now we're playing Russian roulette. We're having the problem that we talked about before with sequestration and other issues because they can't get their arms around this and finally, once and for all, sit down together in a bipartisan manner and actually fix these problems. And I do believe, Congressman Ryan and the Republicans put forth a budget. Is it perfect? They put forth some solutions. It's not perfect. But at least it acknowledges that we have serious problems and that we need to do something to fix them. The Democrats have just voted against it, haven't offered any real alternatives, and ignore the problem. We've got to fix it. We've got to fix it together because these programs are critical for everyone. Everybody needs to have Social Security, Medicare, and we need to have Medicaid to help those less fortunate among us.
Mr. Altschuler, we heard last night at the vice presidential debate that Paul Ryan suggests raising the retirement age, and he also talked about the voucher system, as we know, as it relates to Medicare. Do you support specifically those two elements of the Ryan budget plan?
I think we need to offer people, first of all, raising the retirement age. I think over time we should look at phasing that in. I think that's obviously Americans are living longer, they are working longer. The ratio of folks who are working to those who are retired is changed from those programs were originally put in place. So I think that's a reasonable thing to look at, and we could do that over time. We've made those changes over time. In Social Security, we've been gradually raising the age that people are eligible for Social Security. So I would look at doing that. In terms of using a voucher program, I think we have to look at different alternatives. The plan that Mitt Romney supports offers traditional Medicare for people and also offers premium support. And I think the idea of trying different things, giving people, again, access to traditional Medicare, that's critical, but at the same time acknowledging that there might be other ways to do it and trying them, I think is something that we need to do because the current program simply isn't sustainable.
Mike, your question is for Mr. Altschuler.
Gentlemen, I'd like to ask you about the role of government in terms of job creation. Both of you have a unique perspective. Congressman from a perspective of being a lawmaker and Mr. Altschuler from being a business owner employing people in this country and abroad. Should and can the government directly spark job creation, Mr. Altschuler?
The government can create an environment that will help the private sector create jobs. The government, there's important roles for government, infrastructure investment. That helps. If we had more sewers here in the 1st Congressional District, 70% of the sewage here is treated by cesspools. And there's a problem that it limits the business's ability to build more density because we don't have proper sewers. So an investment by the government in that instance would be helpful, or fixing our infrastructure, dredging our harbors. Those are good investments. Investments in Brookhaven National Lab and Pure Research. Those are good investments as well because we can take what we learn there and leverage that in the private sector. But the question is, and Congressman Bishop talks about this, the 20 largest employers in the 1st Congressional District are the public sector. And I think we need to balance that with a strong private sector. And unfortunately, the private sector right now is hurting. Small businesses right here in the 1st Congressional District are hurting, and we don't have enough jobs. In the 10 years that Congressman Bishop has been our congressman, there are 40,000 more unemployed people. Here on Long Island, unemployment has gone from 5 to 8%. We can't spend our way into that. The government can't create enough jobs to fill all that out. We have to help the private sector. And in some instances, and that's why I came up with a specific 10-point job plan. You can find it at randy2012.com. I talk about how we can step out of the way, help in some instances the private sector do what it needs to do.
Well, first off, there are 27,000 more jobs on Long Island than was the case when I took office. Secondly, there's always been a balance between the private sector and the public sector in terms of job creation. The public sector absolutely has a role. The Public sector's role is to create an environment in which the private sector can flourish. I'll give you an example of one of the areas where we're deficient, and that is infrastructure investment. Now, Mr. Altschuler has said that he would have supported the Ryan budget. And by the way, it is not correct to say that there was not an alternative. There was. There was a Democratic alternative that frankly brought us to balance a lot quicker than the Ryan budget did, and maintained an investment in strong programs in Social Security and Medicare. But the Paul Ryan budget cuts investment in infrastructure by $150 billion, about 17% over the next 10 years. Now, unemployment in the heavy construction industry on Long Island is 30%. Now, that's because every level of government has ratcheted down its investment in infrastructure, and one of the reasons our economy is struggling is we're trying to run a 21st century economy on a 20th century infrastructure. We absolutely have to invest in infrastructure, a proven job creator, and yet the budget that the House Republicans passed, the budget that my opponent says he supports, would take us in the exact wrong direction with respect to at least that one piece of the economy where we know that government investment creates jobs, and it also has a spin-off effect with respect to the private sector in creating additional jobs.
We've touched on the role of government. I'd like to pivot here to both, obviously, business and to the greater issue of the economy. And John, I'll start with you, and you're going to direct your question first to the Congressman.
Just sticking with jobs, Congressman Bishop, your ads have continually bashed Mr. Altschuler's former company as an employment killer that outsources local jobs to India. Do you believe the government's role should be to reward or penalize companies that either bring jobs back home or outsource them to other companies? And if so, what are these incentives and penalties that should be?
Specific piece of legislation that I am a co-sponsor of that would provide tax incentives to companies that either bring jobs back from offshore or keep them from being spent offshore. There's also a piece of legislation that I am the principal author of that has 137 co-sponsors that takes a piece of the outsourcing business, the largest piece, the call center piece. We've lost 500,000 call center jobs in the last 5 years. And it would say to companies that are going to outsource call center jobs that if they do so, they would be ineligible for any federal grant, contract, or loan during the period of time in which they were outsourcing the jobs. Now, I've got 137 co-sponsors, and it's bipartisan, and I'm very hopeful that we can move it. But here's what the stakes are. As I said, we've lost 500,000 call center jobs. The government of the Philippines has added 600,000 call center jobs in the last 5 years. I'm going to suggest that that's not a coincidence. And I will also tell you that when I filed my bill, the government of the Philippines launched a massive lobbying effort to kill what they referred to as the Bishop Bill. Now, I will tell you, I'm not insensitive to the economy of the Philippines, but I care a whole lot more about the economy of the United States than I do about the economy of the Philippines. So that is just one example, actually two examples of legislation that would incentivize businesses to keep jobs here and would penalize businesses that send jobs offshore, and I think that's the kind of thing we need to do.
And Mr. Altschuler, would you like to care to respond to Congressman
Bishop's
attack ads?
Yeah, of course. First of all, during the 10 years that Congressman Bishop has been in office, he's been the prime sponsor of 63 bills. Only 4 of those bills have passed. He's had plenty of time to try to fix the problems that we're talking about today. He's not been successful at doing that. And it's a fact that there are 40,000 more unemployed people here on the island, and the unemployment rate has gone from 5 to 8%. Now, we need to figure out how to fix the job situation. That's why I put forth a 10-point job plan. It's got detail in it, real ideas. And instead of Congressman Bishop running on his record and talking about what he would do in those instances, he spent his entire campaign attacking me. And let's talk about outsourcing. As part of the stimulus bill and other bills passed by and voted by Congressman Bishop, we've sent billions of dollars overseas to China to make windmills. We've sent billions of dollars to companies that have moved their operations overseas as well. So at some point he's gotten religion about outsourcing, but on the other hand, he's also sent billions of dollars overseas to other companies. If we want to fix this economy, and we desperately need to, and we want to bring jobs back to America, bring manufacturing jobs back to America, we need to roll up our sleeves and figure out why they left in the first place. And that's why, again, and I'm not going to have time today in 90 seconds to say it, in a detailed plan, I talked about the steps we can take to make that happen.
But just on the subject of outsourcing, we talked about making it more rewarding to keep the American jobs stateside. Should there be more penalties, both in the tax code, to companies who do ship jobs overseas? They enjoy the benefits of corporate America citizenship, should there be penalties to those? And also, should there be tax loopholes closed to those who decide to ship American jobs overseas? And that's for both of you gentlemen.
Well, I've already answered it. I answer an emphatic yes to both. There should be penalties for those who ship jobs overseas. There should be incentives for those who keep jobs here, and we should absolutely aggressively be closing loopholes. And I think that is essential. We have lost tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs as a result of outsourcing. And what outsourcing is about is increasing the bottom line of the corporations involved, because they're trying to get the same labor done at lower costs. And it is hollowing out the middle class. And you heard Vice President Biden say it last night. I've been saying it for years. You build a stable economy from the middle out, by a strong, stable middle class, not from the top down. Increased corporate profits at the expense of middle-class jobs is not going to build a stable economy, yet that's where we are.
Absolutely, we should close any loopholes, although I'll go back to the first presidential debate. I don't know what loopholes exist for outsourcing companies. President Obama talked about that with Governor Romney, but if there are any loopholes that exist, we should absolutely close those loopholes, and like a lot of the other loopholes that exist in our tax code today. And should we try to incent companies to bring jobs to America? Absolutely, we should try to do that. But
much of the debate obviously has centered on, in the presidential race, tax equity, or what the most efficient tax code would be to revive the American economy. And Spencer, your question addresses that as well.
Who should I address it to?
It should go to Mr. Altschuler first.
Mr. Altschuler, is the federal tax code too generous or too unfair to the top 1%?
The federal tax code is a mess in general. And the tax code, look, at the end of the day, we're all better off if we can lower taxes, particularly for the middle class. That's not a comfortable situation. Here on Long Island, more than probably anywhere else, we appreciate the high burden that taxes present, not only at the federal level, but obviously at the state and the local level. So we want to do whatever we can to reduce the tax burden that people are facing. I agree, we should start with the middle class and those amongst us who are least fortunate. And cleaning up the tax code in general would be a positive thing. We spend too much money and time navigating that code. And also, by bringing down taxes, we can help the small business owners. In the 1st Congressional District, we're dominated by small business owners who earn their income of their business as pass-throughs directly to them. So they're not a corporate entity, it's their individual tax rates. So if we can lower those tax rates for those small business owners, and again, that's in my 10-point jobs plan, that will enable them to take some of that money that they're saving and sending to Washington, most of which, or a lot of which, doesn't ever come back to them, and invest that in their business, hire more employees, produce more products, make more capital investment. That will grow the economy here locally and ensure that our children and our grandchildren, when they grow up, can actually afford to stay here on the island.
I just want to quickly refer to our last exchange. I heard Mr. Altschuler say that we should be closing down tax loopholes. Problem with that for him is that he has signed the Grover Norquist Pledge, which specifically says that a tax increase is defined in part as closing of a loophole. So either he is insincere in saying we should shut down the loopholes, or he is insincere in signing the pledge. You can't have it both ways. We have to find a tax code that works to build our economy. And I will tell you, we gave tax cuts in 01, 03, 04, 05, and 08. And with the exception of the 08 tax cut, all of the others disproportionately benefited the most wealthy among us. And what did we have to show for it at the end of 08? The worst economic collapse we have had in our history since the Great Depression. So cutting taxes is not the magic elixir. If it was, we would all be doing it, and we would all be getting the economic activity that we want. We need a tax code that is fair. We need a tax code that is progressive. We need a tax code that asks people who can pay more to support what goes on in this country to do it. And we need a tax code that provides relief to the middle class who are disproportionately burdened given the current code.
But would raising the top-end income tax rate back to 39%, where it was in 2000, have a deleterious effect on the economy given how fragile it is?
Are you asking me? According to the CBO, no. The Congressional Budget Office has studied that, and they have said that raising the tax rate back to 39% for the top 1% of earners would have no deleterious impact on economic activity as per their calculations.
Do you agree, Mr. Altschuler?
Well, Congressman Bishop has voted against extending the Bush-era tax cuts for those making more than $250,000. That's going to hit a lot of small business owners and families right here on Long Island. And I guess I disagree with the congressman. I think if we can cut taxes, we want to cut taxes. You want to help the middle class, you want to help people here on the island, you got to cut taxes. I mean, I think everybody thinks they're paying too much taxes today. And if we could cut those taxes, those dollars could be reinvested back into the economy. But I also want to talk about one other quickly thing, too, about Congressman Bishop says, well, Randy supports the Ryan budget, this, and this. Well, first of all, I'm not in Congress. You've been in Congress for 10 years. You've been there during a time when we had a Democratic president, Senate, and Congress, and House of Representatives, and we see the direction this country's gone into. But the second thing is, you paint everything either you do what I say or you do what the other guys say. And that's the attitude today of everybody in Congress. And I don't blame just Congressman Bishop. That's guilty on my side as well. It's either the Republican way or the Democratic way. And that's why you vote with your party 93 to 98% of the time. But this is a district, and we learned that in 2010, which is a split district. And this is a district where our representative needs to vote with the district 100% of the time. And sometimes your party leader, if that's Nancy Pelosi or if it's John Boehner, isn't going to like it. But frankly, we shouldn't care. We should care what our customers think.
Wrap it up. You got about 15 seconds.
Just very quickly, I hear Mr. Altschuler say you got to vote with your district. Well, I will tell you that I have seen multiple polls that say that over 70% of this district believes that we should renew all of the Bush-era tax cuts for people who make less than $250,000, something I support, and should not renew them for people who make more than $250,000. So if we're going to vote for the district, Randy, join me. I'm voting with the district.
All right, I want to move on, and Mike, your next question will be directed to the Congressman.
Both of you gentlemen, Wall Street reform is a big issue, both nationally and locally. Congressman, should too big to fail banks be broken up? And you were in office before the bubble burst. Would reform hurt the local economy?
We need Wall Street reform. We had the worst financial collapse in our history. Second to the Great Depression, that resulted in many ways from outrageously irresponsible behavior on Wall Street. No one questions that. And the problem that we have, we've passed a piece of legislation, Dodd-Frank, that fixes a lot of the problems that brought about the crash. We have not yet implemented Dodd-Frank because we are still going through the regulatory process that's necessary to implement the legislative language of Dodd-Frank. And so we remain today every bit as exposed as we were in the summer and fall of 2008 and the spring of 2008 to the collapse that brought our economy to its knees, and were it not for government intervention, would have stayed on its knees for a long, long time. Too big to fail is a very serious problem. I hear Governor Romney say that the Dodd-Frank bill provides what I think he said a big kiss to the too big to fail banks. That's simply not true. That's simply not true. There is no bailout authority in Dodd-Frank, and I think there is specific and several efforts within Dodd-Frank to see to it that we rein in the size of our financial institutions so we are not as exposed as we were in 2008.
Mr. Altschuler, same question for you. Two parts. Should too big to fail banks be broken up, and would reform hurt the local economy?
Would reform hurt the local economy? Well, first of all, we definitely need to fix the system that we have in place today. I agree with Congressman Bishop, and I will tell you that I think most people on Wall Street also agree that there are serious problems. To a certain extent, the technology and the evolution of the market outrode what regulation was in place. Like derivatives are a perfect example. The idea of having an open exchange, a transparent exchange for derivatives would be a good change that I think everybody wants. But at least my understanding of Dodd-Frank, that it does not include provisions that would prevent too big to fail. In fact, it exasperates the problem even more and makes us even more dependent on these large, ginormous financial institutions, and causes a lot of financial pressure for us to actually back them up or bail them out. And one thing that I found horrendous about the bailouts of the banks was, because it was in some instances ill-conceived, we ended up giving them billions of dollars of relief, and then eventually the CEOs and the executives of these companies got multi-million-dollar bonuses. And then we threw up our hands and we said, my goodness, how could that happen? That's unfair. Let's put a 50% tax on them. Well, how could it happen? Because like a lot of legislation passed by the government, it wasn't done properly. And we put in loopholes, even though we bailed them out, that allowed them to get paid very handsomely. And if you talk to businesses right here on the island and across this country, small businesses, they can't even borrow money today from banks. The lending has become extremely difficult. You want to buy a house, you want to start a business, good luck in getting money. And I haven't seen that the reforms that are in place today are going to change that situation.
Let's talk about foreign policy. And John, your first question is going to be answered first by Mr. Altschuler.
Mr. Altschuler, what should the president do in response to the growing nuclear threat in Iran? And what should the American policy be to quell similar nuclear proliferation around the globe?
Well, Iran is a giant problem today, I certainly, assuming that this is something that on a bipartisan basis we need to deal with, the risks of a nuclear Iran are tremendous, because once Iran becomes nuclear, logically a lot of its neighbors and other countries in that region, like Saudi Arabia, are going to arm themselves and also look to have nuclear weapons. And unfortunately for us here in America, that's a terrible situation because we're still so dependent on foreign oil for our own energy. That's why, as part of my 10-point job plan, I talk about energy independence. Because even though we don't get our oil directly from Iran, if they close the Straits of Hormuz, if there's a war, that's going to lead to a huge spike in the cost of oil, and it's going to hurt us right here. So many of us who depend on their car to get to work and to live on Long Island and on eastern Long Island. So we need to, that's a terrible situation, and we can prevent some of that from happening by having energy independence. In terms of Iran and nuclear option, we need to do whatever it takes to stop them from getting the nuclear weapons. I think pursuing stringent sanctions, as hard as we can push, economic sanctions, and doing whatever we can. We don't want to go to the military option unless we absolutely have to. Putting our men and women in harm's way is an absolute last resort. So let's do whatever we can to prevent that from happening. And again, I think that's a bipartisan issue. I don't think there should be a Republican or Democratic perspective on that. I think we all think that nuclear proliferation is one of the most serious threats we face on a global basis. We're going to have to deal with it on a case-by-case basis, but we don't want to go to war over it if we can't.
I'm essentially in agreement. I think the greatest foreign policy challenge we have right now is how to rein in Iran's nuclear ambition. I think the path that we have been pursuing with very strong international support is the right path. That is to say, coercive diplomacy. It's working. The economy of Iran is in shambles right now. I mean, their currency has been hugely devalued just in the last 2 weeks. Inflation is out of control. They're short. They have shortages in terms of refined petroleum, which is very ironic for a petroleum producing country. So I think we're on the right path. I think we should have all options on the table, but I think we should have our eyes wide open and be absolutely certain that the absolute last alternative is a military option, and that should even only be considered once every other option has been tried and found to be unsuccessful. I hear a lot of talk about a surgical strike in Iran to take out their nuclear capability or their centrifuges. I get very nervous when I hear what I consider to be saber rattling from Governor Romney in terms of how he talks about Iran. Let me tell you, the Pentagon has war-gamed this. There is no such thing as a surgical strike. We or Israel tries to take out their nuclear capability within a week. The Middle East is inflamed. There is war in the Middle East, and the United States is a part of that war. So I believe, and I'm looking right at Gary Richard, we have put people in harm's way for 11 years. They are exhausted. Our military is exhausted. We are stretched to our limit of our capability. I'm sorry, I've run out of time. Military option is the last possible option.
Well, I think I speak for a lot of people where it's nice that we have some consensus seemingly on this issue for the most part with you two, but we're still a little bit at a loss. What is your bright red line for when you say, even though it's a last resort that you both agree on, where preemptive military action in Iran is the right move? We all saw Bibi Netanyahu hold up that picture of a bomb at the UN, but where is that line here, even if we don't agree with his necessary threshold? Sure.
Look, I don't make foreign policy decisions, but for me, the line is a weapon and the ability to deliver it.
And you think our intelligence will be good enough that we'll know when it is?
I certainly hope it's a hell of a lot better than it was for Iraq.
Mr. Altschuler?
I'd have a similar answer as Congressman Bishop. And, to be frank, I was watching a debate last night with my wife and the issue on nuclear Iran, and debate about how close and how far they were away from it. My wife said to me, "Is that true?" And I said, "I don't really know if it's true or not. I mean, we obviously don't have access to the intelligence that our government does, and I'm assuming that they're going to do whatever they can to make sure that they don't get to that point. where they do have nuclear weapons. But I think we'd have to find out a lot more and could make a more informed answer if we were in the know on that.
Fair enough. Spencer, your next question goes to the Congressman.
Congressman, when I was a college student, I traveled through Afghanistan, and the country was at peace. The people were great to me. I saw schoolgirls in the sunny side of the streets in Kabul and women veiled from head to toe in the shadows. Now we unfortunately have American-trained Afghani troops shooting at our own soldiers there. What's our obligation going forward? Last night's debate, it was pretty clear from Vice President Biden that we're going to be gone in 2014. What's our plan going forward to these people?
Spencer, let me start by saying that the reason they were nice to you is they didn't know you that well. I can't deny that. I'm teasing. Our obligation is to get out, okay? We accomplished what we went to Afghanistan to do. We went to Afghanistan to decimate al-Qaeda. That's been done. We went to Afghanistan to see to it that they did not have a safe haven in Afghanistan. That's been done. And we are now engaged essentially in training of troops, and we're now engaged in nation building. It's time for us to get out. We need nation building right here at home, and the billions of dollars that we're spending in Afghanistan needs to be spent here at home, building schools and water desalinization plants and sewage systems, exactly what we're doing in Afghanistan. And so I fully agree with Vice President Biden that the job is done. Bring them home. And I frankly was a little nervous to hear Congressman Ryan talk about how maybe we stay beyond 2014. I think 2014 should be a hard and fast exit date, and bring them home.
Well, why wait till 2014 if you feel that way?
First off, for the right phasing out. Also, if you've ever been and seen the massive footprint that we have, I mean, I have not been to Afghanistan. I went to Iraq, pardon me. The footprint that we have there is massive, and just the logistics of withdrawing troops and material safely takes a long, long time.
Mr. Altschuler.
I also agree that we should bring our troops home. I'm not a supporter of nation building. I don't think that's going to be effective, and it's not a good use of our resources, and more importantly, it's not a good use of our men and women and putting them in harm's way for it. I think there's two different questions. One is, should we be there, and is it time to come home? And I think Congressman Bishop and I agree on that. But the second is, how do you do that? And frankly, I'd have to defer to the men and women in our military who have better idea of the most efficient and the best and safest way to accomplish that. And I think what Congressman Ryan was saying last night about the 2014 date is, it doesn't seem, at least intuitively, smart to telegraph to our enemy, hey, this is when we're leaving, but instead to do it, have a general idea of when, but to be smart about it. And that's my concern as well. Again, I would defer to our generals and see what their perspective is, and if they think that we should have a hard and fast date, I'd be supportive of that. But just as a regular person, I would think you wouldn't want to be that open and communicate, hey, at this point we're leaving, because that will certainly give an advantage to our enemies.
Mike Stevens, your question goes to Mr. Altschuler.
Mr. Altschuler, it's been about a month since the unfortunate attack on 9/11 at the embassy in Libya, and since then there's been a lot of back and forth about what really happened, coordinated attacks, terrorism, did a film spark it, and we've had the congressional hearings, which we've got more information about whether the security detail was large enough that they asked for it, was it refused, etc. So the question is, are you satisfied with the Obama administration's response both then and now?
Look, our first instinct appeared to be to apologize. And we were apologizing for a YouTube video, and there was this whole ridiculous story about how this film was made, and I'm very suspicious about the whole history behind it. And I think it's dangerous to be right out of the gate and say, we're sorry, our bad, we can understand why there's violence right now. And I think there was some sense from Americans that that was our government's stance, at least initially. Now it's come clear that this is a planned terrorist attack, and that the video, put that aside, that was an excuse or a spark plug for this to happen. And unfortunately, it looks like, and again, I don't want to put the blame. I don't think President Obama wants to hurt. We wouldn't want to do that. So for whatever reason, there seems to have been some miscommunication between what we seem to have needed on the ground from a security perspective and from what we got. So the best that we could do right now is obviously we mourn the loss of those who lost their lives, and we need to make sure this doesn't happen again, and that we have sufficient security, that our intelligence and our political actions are in coordination. And we also recognize that we are fighting, and again, I am assuming there's general consensus about this, we are fighting a global war on terrorism. And these folks will do whatever they can to bring down this country, and they're not playing by any conventional rules that we know about, and we need to be wary of that and protective of ourselves and fight it as hard as we possibly can, and not be naive about the intentions of our potential enemies.
I would say, first off, that initial communication, which appeared to be an apology, was not an official communication of the United States government. It had not been cleared with the State Department, had not been cleared by the White House. It was an effort on the part of those on the ground to try to bring some order to a situation that they did not fully understand. Basically, they were trying to do the best they could to preserve order, and they thought that taking that approach would be helpful. Turned out that at the time, they did not know that it was an organized terrorist attack. We now know that it was an organized terrorist attack. I will say that I think one of the things I'm troubled by is that it took 48 hours for there to be a recognition that it was an organized terrorist attack. So it makes me, again, at least have some concern with respect to the quality of the intelligence reporting that we were getting, at least in that particular instance. I do think there needs to be an investigation. We need to know what went wrong, and we need to put in place policies and procedures to see to it that it never happens again.
Let's now move to other questions and other issues specifically affecting the Long Islanders. And John, we'll begin with you, and your question will be directed to the Congressman.
Congressman Bishop, illegal immigration has been a highly contentious issue here on Long Island. Studies suggest more than 15% of Long Island's population consists of undocumented residents. What do you think should be done to fix the country's immigration situation?
I've been saying this since March of 2002 when I first became a candidate. By the way, tough to do in 90 seconds. But what we need is comprehensive immigration reform that has 4 parts. Stiffer border protection, stepped up internal enforcement, a visa system that actually works, and a system that works for the 12 to 15 million people who are here now. I believe that that system is a path to earned legalization. A work visa for those who are here now, they pay a fine because they entered the country illegally. They pay back taxes to the extent that they can be calculated on what they earned when they were off the books. They learn English, they learn civics, and they maintain an otherwise clean record. At the end of that period of time, they get a green card. It's not perfect. But it is, I believe, the most humane and the most enforceable means of dealing with a problem that has no easy answer. Anyone who says to you, round them up and send them back, they're not thinking clearly. Not ever going to happen. Anyone who tells you that attrition, which is the other plan that people put forward, what they're trying in Arizona, what they're trying in Georgia, what they're trying in Alabama, that also doesn't work. So I think this is the only path forward. I've been pushing it. I've been a co-sponsor of a bill. The House leadership refuses to bring that bill to the floor, and I think that's unfortunate. We've got to deal with this issue. We've got to stop avoiding it.
Mr. Altschuler, same question.
I think I'm in agreement that we need comprehensive immigration reform, and I agree it's tough to answer that in 90 seconds. And many of the things that Congressman Bishop talked about, I certainly think are also important. But he has been in office for 10 years. And this problem is acute here on Long Island. It's in your face often. You see the illegal immigrants and you see workers utilizing, companies and businesses utilizing those illegal immigrants. We have problems in our schools, which are overcrowded and overburdened today. Part of that is, a reflection of the fact that we have people who aren't in the system, who aren't paying into the system, who are here illegally. They're accessing our health care. So we have a severe financial problems right here on the island, and we have not had an effort by the federal government and by our representatives to deal with that effectively. And when I look at the Congressman's voting record, if it's voting to strip language from a bill expediting the deportation of illegal immigrants charged with felonies, he voted against blocking payments of Social Security benefits to illegal immigrants. He voted in a bill against tighter border security and establishing an employee verification program. And these are the votes that he has taken. And we need to make sure that we lock this down and we deal with the problem, not just let it continue to go by and talk nicely in language that we need comprehensive reform. It's the other guy's fault that we haven't done it. Well, it's your job, your responsibility. There are only 435 representatives. Get it done.
Well, the most important of those 435 did a fundraiser for you 2 days ago. And did you ask him? Did you ask him why comprehensive immigration reform hasn't come to the floor? I'll tell you why. It won't come to the floor because the Republican Party doesn't support it. That's why. So now, I hear about my voting record. I certainly have voted for every single, with one exception, with every single Department of Homeland Security bill. The one exception, I voted against a bill that would have dramatically cut Homeland Security funds for the city of New York. And by the way, I was joined in that no vote by Congressman Peter King, the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. I don't see anybody questioning his credentials on Homeland Security. I have voted for the fence. I have voted for technological enforcement. I have voted for stepped up internal enforcement. I have voted for more border protection agents. So to suggest that I have a record that says that I am willing to tolerate increased activity that none of us believes is in the best interest of this country is simply wrong.
Well, can I just
quick response? Yes.
You know, Congressman Bishop acknowledges, right? Hopefully acknowledges that we're going to need bipartisan support here to get something like comprehensive immigration reform through. But his response to this question and any other problem that I'll bring up is it's the Republicans' fault. It's John Boehner's fault. It's all their fault. Our guys are good guys and their guys are bad guys. So let me make it very clear. There are no good guys right now in Washington. You've got a problem with both parties. They've created the mess we've got right now, and that's why, frankly, I want to replace one of the people who's helped create that mess.
Well, I want to get to an issue, and Spencer, you'll bring this up, that I know a lot of people at home can relate to, and that's the high cost of higher education.
Yes, who should I address?
And you should address Mr. Altschuler.
Mr. Altschuler, you were a Fulbright scholar, a Princeton grad. Congressman, you were provost of Southampton College. Today's middle-class kids and parents are facing nothing but growing bills as state and federal support erodes. So my question is a liberal arts education worth it for kids who can't afford it?
Yeah. Look, you know, I am fortunate. I don't come from a wealthy background, and education for me was one of the ways that I got ahead. I was fortunate enough to do that. You know, I worked part of my way through college, so I know how difficult it is. And unfortunately, since I was in college, the cost of higher education has exploded. Over the last decade, public education has grown, colleges, the cost has grown over 70% above the rate of inflation. So the cost is astronomical. I think the average student now is graduating with $24,000 worth of debt. And unfortunately, many of them can't find any jobs. So they've got this high debt. They've got the degree, but they're not finding any jobs, and a lot of them are leaving Long Island, or they're staying here and they're living in their parents' basements because they can't find their own work. I don't think we ever want to have a situation where going to college isn't a positive. I mean, there's clearly different paths for different people, but higher education is critical. But we have to do something, and it's a difficult problem. We have to do something to arrest the increasing cost of it because it's spiraled totally out of control. And we also have to fix the underlying job market so that when people do get that degree, it reaps benefits. So I would never tell people don't go to college, but we have to fix the job market, and we also have to do something to actually reduce the amount of debt they have. We can play with the interest rates all day long and give people lower interest rates, but if the debt they have is huge and there are no jobs waiting for them, it doesn't really make a difference.
You asked a direct question, I'll give you a direct answer. Yes, a liberal arts education is worth it. Education is now and always has been the pathway to the American dream, and we have to see to it that that pathway is protected. And I have spent essentially my entire adult life dealing with the dual issues of college access and college affordability. And a great deal of the work that I do in the Congress is on those issues, and I am one of the leaders in the Congress on access and affordability. I was part of the team that wrote the legislation that increased the Pell Grant maximum by $1,000, something that's very important to do. I was part of the team that eliminated a wasteful student loan program that was costing the government $8 billion a year that we didn't need to spend. We were basically padding the bottom lines of banks, and we took that money and we gave it to needy students, something I think is very desirable to do. I helped write the legislation that reduced the student loan interest rate from 6.8 to 3.4%. Another good thing, students can now borrow and pay back less. I was also one of the people that wrote the legislation that put in place something called income contingent repayment, where an individual would pay up no more than 10% of his or her discretionary income on a monthly basis to repay their loans, and after 25 years, if there's still a balance, the balance of the loan would be forgiven. All of this is designed to make higher education more affordable. The other thing that we need to do is, and this is really less a federal responsibility than it is a responsibility of the higher ed community, is we have to work at ways to hold down costs of delivering instruction and delivering service, because one of the great drivers of why kids are borrowing so much is that costs are escalating at a rapid rate.
Can I follow up on that?
Really quickly, because we're almost
okay. Let's look at Congressman Bishop's record. While he's been in Congress, we now have the Pell Grants, the student debt is over $900 billion. When Congressman Bishop ran Southampton College, was the provost at Southampton College, he doubled tuition, more than doubled tuition. So he's done nothing to arrest the cost of it. He is part of the problem.
Quick response, Congressman?
Quick response is at the same time that Southampton College's tuition doubled, your alma mater's tuition, Princeton, tripled. So if you want to hang me up on that, talk to your president. I have spent my entire adult life helping people get their slice of the American dream. I am very proud of that. And while I've been helping people climb the ladder to success, you are kicking that ladder out from under them by sending their jobs overseas.
I want to get to one last question here, and Mike, it'll be from you, and it'll go directly to the Congressman.
And is this the actual last question of
yes.
the debate? I'd like to just maybe kind of wrap this up in a sense, asking you about cooperation and bipartisanship. Should Democrats and Republicans in Congress work together? I mean, gridlock has affected them severely and may continue to, depending on who the next president is. Congressman, yes.
Am I first?
Yes.
Absolutely. And every single bill that I've ever filed, I've filed with bipartisan support. The outsourcing bill that I talk about, I have a freshman Republican from West Virginia, David McKinley, is my co-sponsor. I have partnered with Congressman Walter Jones, a Republican, on several efforts that have been successful. I've partnered with Congressman LaTourette, I'm sorry to see him retiring, on an infrastructure bill that would bring federal money to local communities to help deal with wastewater infrastructure. We have to find ways to coalesce on areas where we agree. I have partnered with an incredibly conservative member of Congress from Louisiana named Jeff Landry, because we share a common interest. We want to get more money out of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund to dredge small harbors. So we are working together on that quite cooperatively, and we're getting somewhere. So we absolutely have to have more bipartisanship. But where it has to start is it has to start at the bottom as we move up, but the leadership has to be willing to engage both sides. And I will say that when we were the majority, we didn't do a very good job of engaging both sides. And I will say right now, with the Republicans as the majority, they're not doing a very good job of engaging both sides. We need a return to the collegiality that characterized the Congress throughout the 80s and the early part of the 90s. The collegiality has really, really disintegrated since the early 90s, and I say now, in my 10th year, is worse than it's ever been.
And Mr. Altschuler, as you answer that question,
sure.
Why wouldn't the objective viewer say, if you tried to do what the Congressman said, you'd be primaried? I mean, look at some of the long-standing Republicans that are now going home at the end of this election season because they were primaried because they were viewed to be too cooperative with Democrats.
Look, I'm not going to Congress to become a career politician. I believe in term limits. I signed a term limit pledge. I think those folks in Congress have been there on both sides of the aisle, have been there way too long. And unfortunately, you're right. People are thinking more about, well, am I going to get reelected? Am I going to get primaried? And not about what's doing the right thing. And sometimes doing the right thing is going to be unpopular, and sometimes you're going to lose your job about it, over it. But I'd rather err on that than try to spend my whole lifetime in Congress. Now, Congressman Bishop talks a great game about he's got all these bills that he's got some Republican co-sponsors, but he has voted with his party every single time on every major issue. That's his record over 10 years. That's a long time. And that's the reality of the situation that we have today. And Congressman Bishop blames the Republicans in his press releases, his official press releases, his frank mail that he sends out. He often blames the Republicans for the problems we have in this country. So again, let me be clear tonight. The problems we have today are not just because of the Democrats, they're because of everybody in Washington. And my idea is to go to Washington, create what I would call the common sense economic caucus, a caucus where I grab some Republicans and grab some Democrats, pick a few no-brainer economic issues, ones that everybody agrees upon, and trumpet those together. Things like nobody gets paid in Congress until we pass a budget. I know that's a bill that's out there. Other things like that. and work together as a team. Take the blame together and take the glory together. Don't make it a Republican proposal. Make it a proposal from both parties. And together, I think I can make that caucus work.
You got 20 seconds before closing statements.
I'm a member of what's called the Go Big Coalition, 60 Democrats, 40 Republicans, who signed a letter that went to the super committee that said that don't stop at $1.4 trillion worth of deficit reduction, go to $4 trillion and do it in a bipartisan basis, but put everything on the table. Now that's real bipartisanship. That's acting in a bipartisan basis. That's not rhetoric. That's acting in a bipartisan basis. I put my name on the dotted line and said that I was willing to be part of that group because the problems of this country are so great that we can't allow partisanship to prevent us from solving them.
All right, we are at the point of this program. We're at closing statements, and as predetermined, Congressman, you'll go first.
Thank you, and thank you all very much. And I think this has been a good exchange. You've heard a lot about how I've spent the last 10 years, and I find that one of the themes of my opponent's campaign is that if something bad has happened in the country in the last 10 years, he finds a way to blame me for it. If a problem that we have hasn't been fixed, he finds a way to blame me for it. I'd also like a little of the credit. The Giants have won 2 Super Bowls in the last 10 years, and I would like a little bit of the credit for that, okay? But let me tell you what I have done with the last 10 years. I have saved 1,000 jobs, led the effort to save 1,000 jobs at Brookhaven Lab, good, high-paying jobs. I led the effort to keep the 106th Air Rescue Wing at Gabreski and save 1,200 jobs. I wrote the language in the Recovery Act that brought over $100 million in money directly to our K-12 school systems that saved thousands of teacher and support jobs. I have successfully resolved over 15,000 constituent cases. Now, when I say that, my opponent always says, oh, that's a given. Guess what? It isn't a given. And you can ask Gary Richard. It is not a given. It takes real hard work. It takes knowledge. It takes commitment. It takes dedication. And it takes an experienced staff who knows where to get the job done. And that's what I have, and that's what I do. So I am very, very proud of my service. I am very proud of how I conduct myself in the Congress. I am not a bomb thrower. I am a team player, and I work to solve problems across the aisle. And you will not find a single member of Congress on either side of the aisle that will describe me as anything other than a reasonable, solution-oriented problem solver.
Thank you, Congressman. 90 seconds, Mr. Altschuler.
Well, I don't think this is a question today about, and first of all, thank you very much for today's debate. This has been a great exchange of ideas, and I will give you all the credit for the Giants victory. So, and hopefully we can get the Jets over the finish line this time, too.
Much more focused on the Giants.
Okay, fair enough. I don't think this is a question of congeniality and whether your colleagues like you. I think this is a question of effectiveness. And the record speaks for itself. The facts speak for themselves. Over the last 10 years, there are 40,000 more unemployed people here on the island. Unemployment rate has gone from 5 to 8%. And you talk about all the jobs that you've saved, but that's our money that you're using to save the jobs. That's not your money, that's our money. And unfortunately, the money that we send to the federal government every year in taxes, a lot of that gets lost along the way. And I'm old-fashioned about this, but I'd rather keep the money right here. I'd rather keep the money in your pockets. I'd rather keep the money in our local government than send it to the federal government. And we just have a different, perspective on that. You talk about bipartisanship, but you don't have a bipartisan record. You spent your entire career in Congress voting lockstep with your party over and over again. Now, if we want to change Congress, if we want to ensure that this generation, my generation, passes this country on to the next generation in better shape than we found it, we need to make a change. And what doesn't make any sense to me is sending back to Washington the people who made the mess in the first place. If we're going to clean it up, we need new ideas, we need new people in there, and folks who are going to put their district, not their party leaders, first. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And why don't we give both candidates a big round of applause? That's about all the time that we have, and I'd like to thank across our panel here Mike Stevens, Spencer Rumsey, and John Caligari for doing a great job. Thank you, guys. And wherever you fall on the election or the political spectrum, I think one thing we can agree on, especially in this district, get out there and vote in November. Thank you again, everyone. We appreciate it.